presidential hopefuls take the stage, who stood out on night one of the Democratic debate, and what to expect as frontrunners Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders get to the platform. Plus, citizenship and the census. More on today's Supreme Court ruling on a question the Trump administration wanted to add to the 2020 census. And faith in politics. We'll bring you the latest from the Faith and Freedom Coalition's Road to Majority Conference. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The 2020 Democratic frontrunners get their turn on the debate stage tonight. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. It's round two. Tonight, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders will square off in Miami.
That is right. It is a crowded field of Democrats vying for the White House, with 8 others alongside them and 10 more who took the stage last night. All of them hoping to set themselves apart and win over voters.
Amber Strong kicks off our 2020 coverage tonight.
10 candidates took to the stage for 2020's first round. Up until now, they've worked hard to stay above the fray. But last night, the gloves were off.
There are a lot of politicians who say, oh, it's just not possible. What they're really telling you is they just won't fight for it.
NBC News moderators hitting on the top issues like health care. But it was division over Medicare for All that gave viewers the first spark of the evening.
It's not working.
That's right. So for those for whom it's not working, they can choose Medicare. For the culinary workers in Nevada who I listen to,
acknowledging the system is not working for people.
I think we should be the party that keeps what's working and fixes what's broken.
It took nearly 15 minutes before any mention of the name Donald Trump. But the administration's current policies took center stage. On Iran,
this president and his chicken hawk cabinet have led us to the brink of war with Iran. I served in the war in Iraq at the height of the war in 2005. The American people need to understand that this war with Iran would be far more devastating.
The candidates also taking shots at each other on immigration and recent calls to decriminalize illegal border crossing.
the reason that they're separating these little children from their families is that they're using Section 1325 of that act, which criminalizes coming across the border, to incarcerate the parents and then separate them. Some of us on this stage have called to end that section, to terminate it. Some, like Congressman O'Rourke, have not.
You're looking at just one small part of this. I'm talking about a comprehensive rewrite of our immigration laws.
If you did your homework on this issue, you would know.
When it comes to abortion and keeping Roe v. Wade in place, the presidential contenders standing firm.
I would make certain that every woman has access to the full range of reproductive health care services, and that includes birth control, it includes abortion, it includes everything for a woman.
I would appoint judges to the federal bench that understand the precedent of Roe v. Wade and will respect it.
Lesser-known candidates such as Ohio Representative Tim Ryan were working hard to appeal to moderates.
We could talk about climate, we could talk about guns, we could talk about all of these issues that we all care about. We have a perception problem with the Democratic Party. We are not connecting to the working class people. If you want to beat Mitch McConnell, this better be a working class party.
The only biblical reference of the night came from Senator Cory Booker and his rebuke on gun violence.
And I'm tired of hearing people, all they have to offer is thoughts and prayers. In my faith, people say faith without works is dead.
The surprise winners, at least according to the polls and Google search trends, Tulsi Gabbard and Julian Castro. Now it's time to break out another scorecard as the remaining 10 candidates, including Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, take to the stage tonight. Amber Strong, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Amber. And joining us now is Julia Manchester, who covers the race and all of the candidates for The Hill. Julia, it's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
It seems like a lot of people are talking about Julian Castro today. Who, in your mind, stood out from last night's performance?
So Julian Castro absolutely stood out, but I think Elizabeth Warren was the real front runner from last night. I mean, she was able to so succinctly continue to lay out her policies when it was on health care and the economy. She got the first question of the night. The moderators were asking her questions and asking the other candidates on stage to respond. So clearly she was at the center of that attention. But yes, Julian Castro really got quite a bit of attention when he was really able to tell his story and how immigration on the border in Texas impacts him as a Latino American. He talked about the deceased father and child that tragically drowned earlier this week. And I think he was able to do that in a very authentic way. Another thing he did that was, I think, a lot more authentic than maybe Beto or Cory Booker is speak Spanish. I mean, I think we saw so many candidates speaking Spanish tonight, but it was a little ironic hearing it from two men who aren't Latinos. So I thought it just Julian Castro really had a moment in that regard.
He kind of got into it with Beto O'Rourke over immigration. Some are saying that he actually knocked Beto O'Rourke out of this race. Do you agree with that?
You know, I think it's very possible. Beto O'Rourke, you know, he had a very rough start. We remember the Vanity Fair cover, and he got a lot of backlash for doing some weird social media things like Instagram living his trip to the dentist at one point. He got a lot of backlash for that, a very awkward start. But I think a lot of candidates going into this saw Beto. He has that name recognition. He's probably below Warren, the second-tier candidate on that stage. So I think Beto was the candidate that the other candidates were looking to really punch out. And I think Julian Castro did that being from Texas. So I think he saw that opening there.
Last night, none of the candidates we saw mentioned Joe Biden. Do you think other candidates right there along stage with him will attack him tonight?
I think it's very possible. And I think you'll see Bernie Sanders most likely attack Joe Biden, because right here on stage tonight, I mean, looking at the preview of this, you're seeing two sides of the Democratic Party being represented. You had Joe Biden, the establishment, more, I guess you could say, more moderate side of the Democratic Party, but you have Bernie Sanders calling himself a democratic socialist, a very more so far left progressive policies. And I think Bernie Sanders has maybe been struggling so far because Elizabeth Warren has similar policies to him, but she labels herself differently. She calls herself a capitalist. Bernie Sanders does not call himself a capitalist, so she's more well-rounded, but Bernie Sanders has kind of been painted as this far-left figure, which he doesn't mind, but it'll be interesting to see if he's able to appeal to voters outside of that progressive voting bloc.
All right, Julia Manchester with The Hill. Thank you so much. We'll all be watching tonight.
Right.
Well, tonight, John and I will, and the rest of the Faith Nation team will be live texting during the debate, and you can join us and ask us all of your questions by texting that number on your screen. Text CBN to 22415, and you can also follow along online at cbnnews.com.
Well, the Supreme Court issued verdicts today in a pair of high-profile cases. The justices blocked the Trump administration from adding a citizenship question on the 2020 census. They also decided federal courts have no role in policing partisan redistricting. CBN's White House correspondent Ben Kennedy reports on the High Court's final rulings of the year.
No doubt the Supreme Court dealt a blow to the Trump administration, but it could be a temporary setback given the 5-4 ruling. It is true the citizenship question will not appear in the 2020 census, but it could next time around in 2030.
I think when you have a census and you're not allowed to talk about whether or not somebody's a citizen or not, that doesn't sound so good to me.
President Trump argued they needed the data to improve enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, but the High Court didn't buy it. Chief Justice John Roberts sided with the 4 liberal judges, saying altogether the evidence tells a story that does not match the explanation.
We have to make sure whether that question is on there or not, and I certainly hope it is not, but whether it's on there or not, that the American people come forward and be counted.
Democrats say including the question would likely cause an undercount in immigration populations.
It would be a sad occurrence if people said, well, since that's on there, I'm not going to be counted.
The Supreme Court also ruled federal courts have no role in political gerrymandering. Republicans in North Carolina and Democrats in Maryland are accused of redrawing political districts for partisan gain. But Chief Justice Roberts wrote that voters and elected officials should decide this political dispute, not the courts.
This is an issue that, both Republicans and Democrats are guilty of.
As for the citizenship question, it now leaves here back to the lower courts for review. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, the Supreme Court.
Thanks, Ben. President Trump responded to the High Court's decision today on Twitter, saying it seems totally ridiculous that the government can't ask about citizenship on the census, and that he's asked lawyers if they can delay the 2020 census, quote, no matter how long.
Well, John Malcolm is the vice president for the Institute for Constitutional Government at the Heritage Foundation, and John joins us now for more. John, good to see you.
Good to be with you.
On the census case, John, do you think the court got it right?
No, I don't. I think they got parts of it right. I think that they determined that it would not constitute a violation it would not be a violation of the Constitution to include a citizenship question on the census. I think they also got right that Secretary Ross acted reasonably among the various options he was presented by saying that the best way to get that information is by adding a citizenship question on the census. But what I think the court got wrong was the Chief Justice's portion that was joined by the 4 liberals by saying that the explanation that he offered was pretextual. And that this was not about enforcing the Voting Rights Act, but that there must have been some hidden or unexpressed meaning. They've now kicked this case back to the lower court so that the Department of Commerce can offer a more fulsome explanation, but whether they'll be able to do so in a timely manner is very much, I think, in doubt.
John, we saw the president in his tweet today saying that he's willing to delay the census over this issue. Is that something that's reasonable given that this is a constitutionally mandated requirement?
Yeah, no, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, the Constitution does require a census every 10 years, and, next year is 2020. So I'm not sure how he would be able to justify delaying the census, and, that would certainly be subject to a court challenge.
Hey, John, what about the other case concerning redistricting and the limiting of jurisdiction for federal courts? Was that the right move there, you think?
Yeah, no, I think so. So that had to do with whether or not partisan gerrymandering, which goes back to the founding of our country, is unconstitutional. We have been living with partisan gerrymandering, as I say, back to the time of our founding. No court has ever said that this is a justiciable issue or there's any methodology for accurately and reliably determining how much partisanship is permissible and how much is impermissible when it comes to line drawing. And I think that the justices, the 5 conservatives, in another opinion by Chief Justice Roberts, said this is really not a matter for judges. And if you think that there's too much politics in line drawing, go to Congress or go to your state legislatures.
All right, John Malcolm of the Heritage Foundation, thank you very much.
Good to be with you.
Well, on the topic of immigration tonight, giving into pressure to act, the House will take up a bipartisan Senate measure on border aid. It comes as the deadline to act quickly approaches. Earlier this week, the House passed their version of the $4.6 billion package. Yesterday, the Senate rejected it, offering their own. And while Democrats and Republicans have been taking jabs at each other over immigration and border security, the humanitarian crisis at the border continues.
I think it's not a question of blame. It's a question of being prayerful and understand the consequences of policy. We all want to have border security and do what we need to do to protect our borders, north, south, east, west, Gulf Coast, whatever. We have to do that. But we don't have to undermine who we are as a country.
And House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is facing mounting pressure from moderate members of her party to act on humanitarian aid. Well, coming up, Road to Majority, the latest from the conference bringing together faith and politics here in the nation's capital. Evangelical political leaders are in Washington this week for this year's Road to Majority conference. President Trump kicked off the event yesterday, and today capitalism versus socialism was a hot topic as lawmakers from Capitol Hill addressed the crowd.
This is a time of consequence. This is a time where the fate of the nation is being debated. And in 2020, our country is going to face an assault. We are going to see the biggest turnout on the far left this country's ever seen. That means we need to awaken the church.
But we have to wake up to this. I never thought in my lifetime I'd be standing here having to defend capitalism, but I have to tell you this. Our way of life is in jeopardy. I never thought I'd be sitting here talking about capitalism versus socialism. I didn't ask for this fight, but like you, I'm up for it. Democrats want to convert America to a socialist state.
If 2020 goes in the wrong direction, frankly, if the president's not reelected and we lose the Senate majority and they keep the House, all these things that we've just achieved over the last 3.5 years won't just be gone, they'll be reversed. And that cannot be allowed to happen.
And Abigail Robertson and David Brody are with us now to talk more about the Road to Majority Conference. Both of you, thank you for being with us. Abigail, you were out there today, and we just saw those sound bites with Senators Perdue, Rubio, and Cruz talking about socialism, which was a big theme. But what were some of the other topics they talked about?
Well, it was really interesting being there today. It's more apparent than ever that 2020 is in full swing. And it was very interesting to me that there were a lot of senators we heard from who ran against Trump in 2016 in the GOP primary that were basically giving President Trump stump speeches for 2020. And they weren't just touting President Trump's accomplishments, but they were specifically saying how they believe he's kept his promises to the evangelical community. They were talking a lot about Israel. That was a big issue that came up. Conservative judges defending religious freedom. And so they pretty much were giving full endorsements for the president. And we heard, I also spoke with Senator Marco Rubio as he came off the stage, because there's been a lot going on in the Senate with this humanitarian aid crisis. And these agencies are running out of funding next week if the House and Senate don't pass a bill and send it to the president's desk. So I asked, does he think they're going to get that done? Take a look at what he said.
I hope something gets passed. Something should get passed. And there's only one ticket out of here, only one bill that can pass, and that's the one that the president supported, that the Senate passed with 80 votes, including Democrats. And I think it's hypocritical for some members of the House to be criticizing how migrant children are being treated, but refuse to provide the funds to improve their conditions. So, look, there's a lot to be done. This doesn't solve the problem of the migration, but it most certainly provides funds to be able to deal with what's already come.
Both sides are acknowledging there is a humanitarian crisis at the border, so hopefully we will see that bill pass before the money runs out.
Yeah, David, I know you have a great sense of evangelical voters. Kind of what's your sense being at this conference?
Well, they had 1,000 or so there. It was not that big of a ballroom. They tried to get the larger ballroom. They couldn't. Anyhow, they had 1,000 there, but here's the thing. They had 1,000 that could not get in. Ralph Reed telling me that he was frustrated that they just couldn't. They had to turn away 1,000 people. That was for Wednesday's event with President Trump. But today, Abby and I were there, and I got to tell you, I mean, it was a very big crowd there as well. Look, bottom line on evangelicals and overall in the electorate, in 2016, 138 million Americans voted in 2016. They expect in 2020 for that number to be about 165 million. That's, what is it? That's about 30 million more voters in 2020.
Wow. Abby, this group assembled today is very influential, very active. Is there some sort of checklist in terms of issues, policies that are really important to them?
Definitely. The life issue, I would say, is #1. And I think more so than we've seen in previous years, this pro-life, pro-choice issue is going to dive so much deeper in 2020, because now we have what both sides are saying, extreme laws being passed, whether it's very pro-life bills in Alabama or what we've seen passed in New York on the pro-choice side. So that is going to play a huge role in both sides getting their voters out for that issue. Israel is incredibly important to this crowd, and religious freedom. Today we heard a lot of talk about not just confirming conservative judges on the Supreme Court, but the importance of the lower courts as well, and what President Trump has done with the Republican Senate to get, I think, over 130 lower court judges on the bench. So those are definitely the big things.
David, real quick, we only have about half a minute left, but I understand from your reporting that the sponsor of the Faith and Freedom Coalition, Faith and Freedom Coalition, is going to make a specific push for Latino and Hispanic voters, evangelicals. How so?
15 seconds, I'll tell you bottom line. They have a $50 million budget. They're going to spend $4 million of that on Latino and Hispanic outreach. And it's not just, here, let's throw $4 million. They're going to actually have, it's going to be targeted with volunteers and everybody on the ground making a big push.
All right.
All right. David and Abigail, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Well, the G20 summit is underway in Japan. The latest on the meeting of world leaders when we come back.
President Trump is in Japan, gearing up to meet with leaders from around the world. The president arrived in Osaka for the State of the G20 summit today, and one of his major priorities while there is meeting with his Chinese counterpart, President Xi. The discussion set to include trade talks in hopes of coming to an agreement and ease the trade war between the two countries. Also on the agenda for the president during the G20, a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin and discussing rising tensions with Iran and other world leaders.
Well, Christians in Turkey face growing hardship when it comes to living out their beliefs without fear of government backlash. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom convened a congressional hearing on the issue today in which Pastor Andrew Brunson spoke. He saw firsthand the current state of religious freedom in Turkey after being falsely imprisoned in the country for 2 years over his Christian faith.
I want to underline that less than 2 months after my release, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, which only takes about 30 cases a year, and I'm glad they took mine, they concluded that the Turkish authorities targeted and arrested me on the basis of my nationality and my faith. They confirmed that I was a victim of religious persecution. The Erdogan regime has stoked an already deep-seated suspicion and animus towards Christians, and one of the ways I did it was through my case. There's still a high degree of freedom for Christians relative to other Muslim countries in the region, but I'm concerned that all the signs point to this changing soon.
Pastor Brunson is writing a book that will detail his religious persecution in Turkey. It's set to be published this fall.
Still ahead on Faith Nation, more good news for the U.S. economy. But could it be overshadowed by the country's rising debt? Finally tonight, some good news for the U.S. economy. The Commerce Department reporting today healthy growth in the first quarter of the year. The economy grew at 3.1% during that period.
But it's not all good news. Debt in the country is also on the rise. The national debt is projected to reach unprecedented levels in the decades ahead, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. The agency predicts the government's debt will reach 144% of the total economy by 2049. That would be the highest level ever. But those estimates actually are lower than they were last year. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great night. Also, don't forget to join us tonight as we discuss the night of the Democratic debate, night 2. You can join us once again by texting CBN to 22415 and for instructions how to participate. We'll see you tomorrow.